Good day, and thank you for inviting us to speak here on this important platform. My name is Lotן. I am a lawyer, and for the last 18 years, I've been the legal consultant to Asaf Association, headed by Mrs. Sharon Gur. One of Asaf's main goals was to increase the awareness and recognition to fibromyalgia and fibromyalgia patients, especially from the Israeli National Insurance Institute, or Social Security. For those who are not familiar with the subject, I will explain a little about the meaning of such recognition. The National Insurance Institute in Israel grants various rights and benefits to those who suffer from disabilities. Eligible to this kind of benefits are people who suffer from medical problems, including in a list of diseases and physical disabilities. That list, we shall refer to it as the list or the list of disabilities, determines degrees or rates of disability. The same list includes many medical conditions with varying degrees of severity, each of which has a rate, degree, percentage of disability. The list is part of the Israeli legislation as regulations, and it can be changed only by the Minister of Welfare after recommendation to do so by the National Insurance Institute and with the approval of the Minister of Health. In 2008, we began a long journey to have that list revised so it shall include fibromyalgia syndrome. We did not believe that the journey would last 13 years, and even today it has not yet come to an end. Along the way, we submitted 3 petitions to the High Court of Justice to overcome bureaucratic red tape and push the Social Security to advance with the process. Finally, at the end of 2021, the list was amended and fibromyalgia was officially recognized by the Israeli legislature, which determined significant rates of disability regarding fibromyalgia. I shall present the section or clause of disability that has finally been formulated and added to the list. Before I do so, I must confess that the section that has been added to the list raises quite a few concerns and has been criticized quite a bit, both by doctors and also by lawyers who represent the disabled persons. Since Asaf filed the petitions that led to the change in legislation, we were constantly updated on the legislative process, even though sadly not all of our ideas were adopted. It is well known that sometimes one page of history gives a better explanation than 1,000 volumes of logic. Therefore, I shall briefly speak about the process we went through until we got the clause in its last version, last for now. In Israel, people suffering from a medical condition are entitled to various benefits from the National Insurance Institute. The first requirement that a person must meet in order to be eligible for these rights is being evaluated with a rate of disability by a medical committee. That committee evaluates the rate, percentage, of disability according to the list of disabilities. This list specifies levels of severity to each medical problem, and for each, the degree of disability is presented in percentage. For example, loss of vision in one eye renders disability of 30%, while loss of vision in both eyes 100%. As expected, the list must be updated from time to time due to new data and research. The update process is relatively complicated. When the National Insurance Institute decides that it is time to update the list regarding new understanding of particular problem, research is carried out and new recommendations are formed. Those recommendations must be approved by several authorities. The final approval is made by the Minister of Welfare. In 2008, since the National Insurance Institute has not yet initiated an update on fibromyalgia, we urged the Minister of Welfare, currently Israel's president, to intervene. Despite his intervention, the issue was not really dealt with, and in 2013 we had to submit a petition to the High Court of Justice asking the court to order the Social Security to act. Consequently, in 2014, under pressure from the Supreme Court, the Social Security Institute formulated a recommendation for a section or clause of disability for fibromyalgia. Disability levels up to 50% were determined according to the level of functional disorder and with a requirement to prove the need of medical treatment and formal documentation of the treatment in order to deter imposters, apparently. This recommendation was not promoted, and in 2019, again, we had to file a petition to the High Court of Justice. As before, this petition has had its consequences. Another recommendation was drafted very different from the last one. The draft was published in general media to trigger responses from the public. Following harsh criticism leveled against the new published draft, the National Insurance Institute formulated another draft of disability section, quite similar to the one they reached in 2014. Disabilities from 0% to 50%, depending on the degree of dysfunction. And a note was added to the disability clause stating that disability should not be determined both in relation to the syndrome and in relation to the symptoms, which makes sense. However, the phrasing was not clear enough. In previous conceptualizations, the correct principle was determined in this way. Disability should not be determined for the syndrome and for the symptoms concurrently. Disability should be determined according to the higher of the two. It is important to know that according to the list of disabilities, the disability rate due to generalized pain is 20%. For migraines, the disability rate can reach 40%. For depressive affective disorder with need for medication, not major depression, 20%. For a relatively mild cognitive disorder, 25%. That is, the symptoms themselves can determine a significant degree of disability. The principle of determining disability rate according to syndrome or symptoms, the higher of them, is quite reasonable. Along the way, we noticed several attempts of intervention by various forces who have actually tried to lower the disability rates in the new section. The amendment was signed by the Minister of Welfare soon after some aggressive interventions led to lowering the high rank from 50% to 40%. To now, the section added to the list is like this. And I quote, fibromyalgia syndrome or chronic fatigue syndrome, which include pain or fatigue, will be evaluated as follows. 1. In remission without dysfunction, 0%. 2. Symptoms present causing dysfunction, 10%. Subsection 3. Mild symptoms, moderate dysfunction, 20%. And 4. Symptoms of moderate severity with significant dysfunction, 30%. Subsection 5, severe symptoms that require regular medical care and severe dysfunction, 40%. Subsection 6, in cases where the percentage of disability due to one or more of the impairments accompanying the syndrome is higher than 40%, the rate of disability under this section shall be determined according to the highest percentage of disability among the impairments accompanying the syndrome exceeding 40%. Note 1. Disability percentages shall not be determined due to this syndrome and due to impairments associated with the syndrome concurrently. 2. For the purposes of this item, impairments associated with the syndrome, including irritable bowel syndrome, sleep disorders, impaired concentration and memory, depression and body aches, including headaches, generalized body aches, and TMJ. We see that the first degree is a bit peculiar. Remission, that is, without symptoms. A bit logically problematic, asymptomatic syndrome. But now it seems that there are 4 different degrees, determined according to 2 parameters. A, severity of symptoms, and B, dysfunction. in such a way: symptoms present and mild dysfunction, 10%. The second one, mild symptoms with moderate dysfunction, 20%. The third, symptoms of moderate severity plus significant dysfunction, 30%. 4, severe symptoms plus severe dysfunction with need of medical care, 40%. This section raises some questions, and among them, how shall the severity of symptoms be determined? How shall dysfunction's severity be determined? What happens when there are mild symptoms with a significant dysfunction, meaning a combination of two different degrees? Regarding the note, what is the meaning of the phrase impairment associated with the syndrome? Is it referring to the symptoms that constitute the syndrome? What happens if a person suffered from migraines before he began to suffer from fibromyalgia? Will they treat migraines as a concomitant impairment and thus ignore it? Will a person who has a disability due to fibromyalgia at the rate of 10% and depression at the rate of 10%, will the depression be ignored of? According to a paper issued by the Social Security, to some of these questions we can find an answer. So, according to this paper, severity of syndromes should be assessed while considering, and I quote, well-accepted scales such as the FIQR or WPI and SSS, referring to the 2016 diagnostic criteria, and SF36 questionnaire. It is evident that the disability section added to the list creates new problems and difficulties. Until now, it is not yet clear where will these difficulties lead to. We believe that the new section is not clear enough, and its phrasing will inevitably create problems. It will have to be amended. The National Insurance Institute has declared unequivocally that they intend to monitor implementation of this new directive and correct it as soon as problems are evident. Although I discussed at length some of the problematic issues the new section raises, but honestly, it is concentrating on the empty half of the glass. It has to be said that the very existence of a specific section referring to fibromyalgia in the Israeli legislature constitutes a significant advance in the removal of disputes. We can say that we addressed what is, in our opinion, is the most important stronghold in the struggle for recognition of the suffering of fibromyalgia patients. This achievement shows the importance of patients' associations such as ASAF that with tenacity leads to changes even though the work is not finished yet. We started only 14 years ago. I'm proud to mention the great help we received from 3 leading doctors in the field in Israel. Professor Dan Buskila, who helped us to arrange the first meeting with the Minister of Welfare and accompanies us since 2008. Professor Jacob Ablin, who for years has accompanied the association in its struggle and has spared no effort to help. And Professor Howard Amital, who never stopped participating in the struggle alongside with us. Professor Amital was and still is involved in every aspect. I remember days of intense activities when my wife would say that Professor Amital and myself could not fall asleep without a phone call to coordinate positions at around midnight. I sincerely appreciate the opportunity I had to take part in this important struggle, and for that I thank Mrs. Sharon Gur, chairperson of ASAF. We hope that our success will inspire other patients' associations to continue struggling and make other countries follow Israel's example. Thank you very much for listening.